Welcome to the Angular session for directives. I'm Gary and I'll be the presenter for you today. Let's quickly look at what directives are and see how it actually augments Angular 2 features to help develop a scalable application. Alright, so in today's agenda, we will be talking about why we need a directive, what are Angular directives in the first place, different types of Angular directives, and built-in Angular directives. Along with that, we will also look at some of the working use cases with custom Angular directives, and today we will be doing a quick demo with directives as well. Why do we need Angular directive? Well, it's a very simple concept, and the concept runs behind the idea that you can use reusable code for most of the functionalities or a lot of functionalities in your application. Like you all know, Angular 2 is basically component based. Everything is based on components. Any kind of data inputs is also components. Any kind of data output is also based on components, where you use events to push out data, and any kind of parent-child relationship also works across with input outputs as well as data sharing with services. So whenever you're working with that, you might need a scenario where you don't need a template view, but you might need some particular functionality. In those particular scenarios, there is a section of Angular which say that yes, you can do some particular functionality without having a view. It just provides a functionality wherever that particular functionality like attribute, class, or component is available, which means that if it's an attribute and you provide that to your custom component, that particular functionality will be available for that particular component or that particular HTML tag. And similarly, changing any kind of code or changing any kind of structure of the DOM, all these are available with directives. So directives are basically something that change the behavior whenever required and wherever it is placed. You just have to import all the directives to all your components and start using them in your components, whether it's HTML or your components based on a declaration of the directive. You should be able to work across with that. Directives can be imported anywhere, providing a similar functionality, and this is because directives are reusable. So why do we need directives? Well, directives provide two main things. It provides code modularity, manageability, as well as it provides reusable code. In the sense that if you have some particular section of code that needs to be used again and again, you can actually create one simple directive that can be put in one particular place, and you can import that in all the sections or all the components that you need to work with that particular directive. In case of code modularity, separating the functionality makes a lot of sense, because now if you want to change the implementation to something different, you would be able to do that. It also provides the developer to focus on the UI, and it also provides a JavaScript developer to focus on the logic. So that's something very important, and that's something very nice. It makes your code a lot manageable, and it also makes it testable because now it's manageable and modular. So what is an Angular directive? Directives extend HTML with new attributes or classes, and these provide some functionality. This functionality may be related to change of the DOM structure, some particular function that you need, and the DOM is changed accordingly to the directives instruction, whether it is change of structure or providing any kind of functionality. A attribute would basically sit as an attribute in an element, which means that whenever you use an attribute like ng-for, it will be identified by Angular, and Angular is going to provide the functionality of what ng-for is all about. In this particular case, ng-for basically does a repeat of the template li tag. So whenever you have an li tag and you provide ng-for in the li, it is going to repeat the li number of times the courses array length is defined for. And in case of courses, what ngIf attribute does is it checks if selected courses is defined. If it is defined, it is going to provide that particular value. If it is not defined, it is not going to provide that value, which converts to truthy or falsy, and courses will be shown or not shown depending on that. So that's something very nice, where you can avoid a lot of code writing again and again and again. You should be able to repeat as well as show hide a particular section of code whenever that particular attribute, directive, or any other directive is there. So Let's do a quick introduction of what are directives. Angular provides a set of built-in directives which offer functionality. This particular functionality can be anything from repetition of DOM, from show and hide of DOM, providing a router outlet, or providing a placeholder for your URL page changes. And you can also create your own directives if that particular built-in directive is not available within Angular. And it is done in a very simple fashion. You just have an annotation or a decorator of directive, and this uses a selector. Depending on how you define a selector, you would have the directive as an attribute, you would have a directive as a class, and you would have a directive as an element. In case of this particular demo, you would basically have a directive which is created as an attribute directive because it has square brackets around it. But in case you want to change it to a class directive, what you would basically do is remove those square brackets and use a dot, and it will provide you a class directive. Directives are always accompanied with a set of functionalities provided by TypeScript or ES6 classes, JavaScript classes, and it would have a very specific name with how a class is defined with the starting of a capital letter. So what are the different types of Angular directives? Angular directives can be element directives, which are components. Components have a template. They can be structural directives, which do not have a template, but it adds and removes DOM elements to change the layout, which means it provides the structure to the DOM. And in case of non-structural directives or attribute directives, it just changes the behavior. So say, for example, if you want a particular behavior like going from one page to another, which href in anchor tag does. Similarly, there is a functionality with Angular which is called as router link, which is an alternative for href, which provides a lot more functionality than what href would provide. So that differentiation is definitely there. So you can change the structure, or you can just provide a particular functionality. But remember, components are also directives, but the only difference between a component and the directive is that directives don't have a template, components do have a template. Alright, so what does a component directive look like, or what does a component look like? Component is basically, like I said, directive with a template. It is created with @component annotation. There are a lot of metadata that are available which defines what component it is, what it will look like, what are the change detection structures, what would the component behave like, and so on and so forth. An annotation of component always accompanies, like directive, it will also accompany a set of functionality. And this particular set of functionality is something very unique to component because it also associates a template with the component class. So what are structural directives? Structural directives alter layout by adding, removing, replacing elements in the DOM. Like say, for example, ng4 would repeat the li tag number of times the courses.length is defined for. ngIf is going to show or hide based on the truthy or falsy value of selected courses. So if selected courses is defined, it's going to be truthy. If it's not going to be defined, it's going to be falsy, and accordingly it will show or hide the course detail. So attribute directives, example ng model. ng model is a form directive which helps associate JavaScript variables or JavaScript models or JavaScript objects to your input or form tags. Remember, ng model is something that allows you to update the input tag from the JavaScript or update the JavaScript object from your user action input tag. So that's definitely going to be there, which means that if you have an object with course.name and course.skill, you will be able to associate the input with course.name, and input for course.name is going to have two-way binding, template to JavaScript and JavaScript to template value changes detected. So this is something very unique for attribute directives, as well as something like ng model where two-way binding is provided. But always remember, your directives or your Angular works with single way change detection, which means that if there is a change in the user DOM template, it is intimated to your classes using events, which is denoted by a round bracket. if you notice, ng model has a round bracket, so that basically associates an event, and you would have a square bracket that associates a change in the JavaScript classes or JavaScript objects into your input tag or your form elements. It displays the value based on what is the value in the JavaScript, or it displays the value based on what is the change in your section of code. Great. So what are the built-in directives here? The built-in directives that are available are ng class, which allows you to change class dynamically, ng style, which allows you to change style dynamically, ng if, which changes the DOM structure or hides or shows the DOM structure, ng switch, which switches according to what is the expression value, like a switch in your JavaScript. And ng for would be a for statement for your array item in your DOM. So if you use ng for, you can repeat. If you use ng switch, it will switch what template should be shown. Ng if would show and hide a single template. Style would change the styles from JavaScript, and class would change the class with JavaScript. So that's exactly what it will be used for. Great. So what are the different usages, and what would the basic usage be like? If you have ng style, you can actually define that as an expression value or an expression variable called as my styles in your class, and you can define the class from your JavaScript. If you notice, the style is defined in the JavaScript and it gets applied to ng style directly. So if you change anything in the JavaScript, that will get automatically pushed into the directive, or it will be pushed into the DOM directly from the JavaScript. You don't have to do a lot of manipulation. It does that for you. So all that issues of jQuery, add class, remove class, all those things gets removed, and it becomes a lot simpler to manage classes and styles like that. The second is ng if, which shows or hides based on through your falsy expression. The third is ng switch, where ng switch you would associate it to a variable called as course, which is going to be in the JavaScript class, and you would have a set of spans where you have ng switch case, the second one, third one, fourth one, and in case it's a default option, which means that if none of them match, it is going to show the default. And if it is Hadoop, it is going to show the first one. If it is Angular 2, it is going to show the second one, DevOps third, AWS fourth, and so on and so forth. So ng switch, as I said, is going to bind to an expression, and ng switch case is going to bind to an expression value, and it is going to match it. That's exactly what it does. And if there is no match, ng switch default is going to be taken as the default. So ng for is going to repeat. So if courses.length is equal to 5, it is going to repeat 5 times, and courses.name associated to each of the index of arrays is going to be shown. All right, great. So, and a template, well, star means that it is going to modify the template or change the structure. If there is no star, it means that it is not going to change the structure. It's just a simple functionality. So remember, the star, it's something very important. The star means that it's a structural directive. Great. So how do we create a custom attribute directive? Like I said before, it is done with an annotation called as @annotation of directive. It is imported from the core, and you would be able to do a lot of things from your directive. Not just would you be able to capture events from the parent where it is associated to, but you would also be able to go ahead and make a change in the parent or get changes from the parent. Changes from the parent is basically done with inputs and host listeners. Changes to the parent is done with outputs. And this is something very unique to both directives and components. But in case of directives, it becomes a lot important to look at the host listeners, because it would go ahead provide you the access to that particular element as well. Element ref is something that provides access to the element reference where this particular my highlight attribute directive is associated. So if you have a div which has an attribute called as my highlight, it is going to element ref is going to take that particular div and provide the complete reference of the DOM element div, and it will be accessible from the JavaScript class of this particular directive. Great. So host listeners can listen to parent events and trigger a particular function. So the parent event that's being listened to is the mouse enter, and in case of the trigger, it is going to trigger the on mouse enter. You can name it anything. There is no hard and fast rule about what is the function, but you can definitely go ahead. You have to definitely keep this mouse enter even the same, and you can also go ahead access the element reference using native element after doing a dependency injection of the element ref. So that's something very unique to directives as well as components. Great. So let's quickly look at how we can access this particular or create this particular directive. Directive is imported as an annotation. Element ref is also imported, which is used as a type. Host listener is also an annotation which captures host or the parent events. Input is going to take care of access to any kind of input that is provided to my highlight. We'll quickly look at how it is going to be defined, but let's quickly look at element ref. It allows you to access the DOM element. In case of host listener, it's going to allow you to access the host events. In case of input, it's going to allow you data access from the parent to the directive. So you can push some particular data, or you can push some particular string or text from the directive into the directive class. Directive metadata defines or contains the details of configuration of how the directive is going to function and how the directive is going to be used as well. Selector defines what kind of directive it is. Dot my highlight means class directive. Square bracket my highlight, square bracket close means attribute directive. A directive class performs or provides the functionality of the directives, and that's something very unique, where you don't have to do a lot of bindings. You don't have to go ahead associate, just provide the annotation and you would be associating this particular class with the directive that you're creating. Constructor is a normal constructor like in any other backend language, which gets triggered off during the start of object instantiation of highlight directive. And it will also allow you to inject any kind of dependencies into this particular constructor. You will be able to listen to the host listener or the host events or the parent events using the host listener. And this is a directive which provides you with the listening capabilities. An alternative is provide a metadata of hosts, and you should be able to combine all the listeners in one particular place. Custom structural directive. Well, custom structural directives are something very similar. Definition of star is going to be making difference, and in case of how to create a directive, let's quickly go ahead and look at how we can actually do that. What I'm doing right now is I'm actually starting up what we are trying to do. I'll provide you with an end goal and we'll start developing that in a normal application. We will use a quick start that basically comes from, let it start. We'll use a quick start that basically comes from Angular.io. So I'll go to the quick start. I'm going to click on the quick start seed, and I'm going to go ahead download this particular quick start seed from here. You also have the option to clone from a Git module, a Git repository. That's also available. After you do that, install the npm packages using npm install command, and then run npm start, which we just did right now. So it is compiling the whole application. Let it do that. So the directive that we are going to create is, as soon as you move the text over it, it is going to change colors. Now there is a default color that is already provided here. But in case you don't want a default color, you want a particular selection, you can definitely do that. If you change it to cyan, it will change it to that particular color, and if you change it to green, it will change to that particular color. This is a very simple directive that can be created with Angular, and the use case can be different, or the use case can also get a lot complex. It completely depends on what your requirement is. So I'm going to close this. Let's come back. Let's quickly go ahead and great. So I'm going to create a directive that can be used within a component called as myapp. and the name of the directive is going to be my highlight, and it will help you go ahead use this particular common directive which you have created. Great. So I'm going to create a very simple component. The component is going to have a template which will get associated to the radio buttons, and that particular radio button on selection is going to trigger an event. As soon as they are clicked, it's going to trigger an event, and it will go ahead pass a particular detail to our function and will allow you to capture those. So that is what we are going to attempt out here. So I'm going to go ahead and import component from Angular core, and I'm going to export the class app component. Selector is the name of the component that we are going to create, which is going to be my app. All right, great. So a simple change of color on click, and all right, I think I captured this with green here, yellow. Great, so I have a very simple input form which are all radio buttons, and I'm going to use a paragraph. All right, great. So very simple component is ready for us. Let's quickly go ahead and create a directive. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a directive. It's a very simple directive annotation with the metadata, and it exports a class like we discussed before. And I'm going to go ahead and create the class with the name highlight directive. I'm going to go ahead and create some small functionality, set of functionalities here. Let's also define the selector for it. I'm going to create an attribute directive. In case of class directive, like I said, it's going to be a dot. And the name of the directive I'll name is my highlight. And I'm going to first create a constructor. I'm going to push and define a private variable called as el, which is of the type element ref. I'm going to keep it as is. So we have a variable within our class here. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the input annotation, and I am going to go ahead capture the default color, which is going to be a string. Small case string is a basic primitive data type that is defined in TypeScript. And the second input I'm going to define is my highlight, which is the attribute that we are going to use in our HTML, that I'm going to go ahead and assign to highlight color, and this highlight color is also going to be a string. And a quick check, declaration of instance variable, not all ought to appear after the declaration public function. Okay, let's handle this a little later, and we will also go ahead and start creating captures of create. So mouse enter, mouse leave, and we will also define a function which is going to do some changes to element. Great. So we have a mouse enter event, we have a mouse leave event, we have a function that is going to do some changes to the parent DOM. So let's quickly look at what changes. It says it's unused, that's okay. Let's start working on it. It should get resolved. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger this particular function called as highlight color, and I'm going to leave it at it. I'm going to do the same thing out here, highlight color, so that that particular function is triggered. And I'm going to go ahead and define my color as string, which is going to be my actual input. If it is defined, it is going to be captured. If it is not defined, it is going to take the default color. That's what it's going to do. And I'm going to go ahead and say this.el, because we created an object called as el, or a variable called as el in this particular class. And I'm going to access the native element for that. And I'm going to say the style dot background color is equal to color, which is going to be passed to this particular function. The second thing I'm going to do is, it requires, if you notice, this requires some signature arguments, and we have not supplied that. I'm going to use multiple options here. The second option is default color, or if the default color is also not provided, then I'm going to provide it as red. So there are three options. If you provide a particular color, it is going to take that color, or if it is the default color, it is going to take the default color, or it is going to provide red as the base option. At this particular point of time, default color here in your paragraph tag is there only with one section. So one section is going to have the default color attribute, one section is going to have the highlight color, and if my highlight color is not defined, it is going to try look at default color. If it is not there, it is going to go ahead assign red. That is exactly what it's doing. And on mouse leave, I'm going to go ahead and provide null, which means that it is going to remove any kind of color that is there. A simple directive on mouse enter, it is going to assign highlight color attribute, or it is going to assign default color attribute, because we have got it as an input. And the third one is, if none of them are defined, it's going to provide red. In case of mouse leave, it's going to assign everything to null, so no color will be there, and it's triggered by this particular function called as highlight. That's exactly what we are doing. Very simple directive, not a lot of things, but you can definitely complicate it based on what your function requirements are. So let's quickly go ahead and trigger this off. This should not stop us, but still, let's try compiling this. I'm going to go ahead into the module, and I already have it defined. Fantastic. The second one is app component. I think I have defined. Yes, I have it defined. And let's quickly change this to app director, which is the actual path. And let's go ahead and run this with npm start. Remember I have already done npm install enter, so it has installed everything in the node modules folder here, and it also has all the dependencies. I'm just going to now run this particular command, and if you notice in this particular app folder, it is going to create .map files as well as the JS files which are required for this particular application to run. And in case there is an error, we'll also try and rectify that particular error. We should not have any. It's a very simple directive, but just in case there are, we will try and rectify that. Let's go back, look at my highlight. Yes, we are using my highlight, which is there. I'm using highlight color. Default color is also there, which is not defined with anything, which means that it's going to use the same name. But in case of my highlight, if you notice the app component, my highlight is going to be used as highlight color here. This is how you change names internally. If you don't want to change names, just don't provide any kind of changes there. Let's quickly look at whether it has got compiled. Yes, it has without any issues, so that's nice. Great, so we have this working, right? So violet is the back default color, which we have provided here, and red is the default color that we have provided in our default, because nothing is there defined. And in case I go ahead and click, it should now provide green, yellow, or cyan. Great. So this was about attribute directives. Any specific questions? All right, great. I do not have any kind of questions here, but I will definitely go ahead and guide you through some particular section which you might find interesting. If you want to learn more about directives, you can definitely go to docs. You can have a look at API reference and have a look at all the directives in this particular section. So your directives which are inbuilt will be available within a section called as D. So those all the D's are basically directives. And in case you want to have a look at this particular video, please contact the support team at support@edureka.co. And in case you want to have detailed look at this particular presentation and the codes, please get in touch with the sales team at sales@edureka.co. Even if you're interested in a particular session that we are going to cover, please contact the sales team at sales@edureka.co. And by chance you happen to have any questions, you can definitely contact the support team with some specific questions. They'll be very happy to answer as well as support you with any kind of guidance that you need for the sessions that we have. The sessions that we have for Angular 2 is going to cover components, it's going to cover dependency injection, it's going to cover a lot of different aspects from routers to testing to a basic introduction of Node.js and basic introduction of Jasmine. So it is going to cover the whole section in entirety, and you would definitely have a lot of things that would be done in a 8 session, which is 3 hours each, and you would be able to have a lot of details with Angular 2. And Angular 2 is really good. I really hope you make the choice with Angular 2, and I'll be looking forward to see you in one of the sessions. Before we end off this particular session, I have a quick question coming in which says that what is the difference between attribute directive and a structural directive? An attribute directive may not change the DOM structure. A structural directive will change the DOM structure. Structural directive is defined with a start of star. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Fantastic. All right, again, if you want to have a look at the code as well as this video, please get in touch with the support section at support@edureka.co. And in case you want to register for this particular course, which I definitely recommend, please contact the sales team at sales@edureka.co. You all have a nice day, and I hope to see you in one of the sessions there.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply to them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to our Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!